shortly thereafter by long streams of common swift sapper. Their nests are built in dark places, often under the eaves of roofs, and sometimes inside hollow trees or on the sides of cliffs, and are formed of straw and feathers cemented together with the sticky saliva that the bird's glands produce. The swift's feet are evidently not structurally designed to allow for walking or perching, so the bird obtains all its food and nest materials while in flight and even drinks by skimming over the surface of the water. It rests by clinging to vertical surfaces. The swift's cry has a somewhat wailing, melancholy note. That the Hebrew sis identifies the swift is indicated by the use of the same name in Arabic for that bird. The name is suggested by some scholars to indicate a rushing sound, but others consider the name to represent the shrill cc cry of the swift. Hezekiah, upon recovering from illness, said in a thoughtful composition that he kept chirping like the swift, evidently in a melancholy way, and the prophet Jeremiah used the migratory swift as an example when rebuking the people of Judah for not discerning the time of God's judgment. Issa 38. 14. Curate. 7. Swimmer. A person who can propel himself through water by the use of his arms and legs. The ability to swim was common among the ancients. S 47. 5. Act 27. 42, 43. In an early Egyptian text, a father mentions that his children took swimming lessons, and Assyrian reliefs depict warriors as swimming, often with the aid of inflated skins. Ability to swim was a must for fishermen. When using a dragnet, they would occasionally dive into the water and pull a portion of the weighted edge under the rest of the net to form a bottom. Although apparently a good swimmer, Joe 21. 7, 8, the fisherman Peter began to sink and called for Jesus Christ to save him at the time Peter walked on the water. This was likely the result of the unusually rough water, coupled with Peter's personal fear. Mount 14. 27-31. In a prophecy against Moab, Isaiah alluded to the actions o textoi acute miritra longo, sycamore 1049 thick-skinned, stocky body usually covered with coarse bristles. The pig's snout is blunt, and its neck and tail are short. Not being a cud chewer, the pig was ruled unacceptable for food or sacrifice by the terms of the Mosaic law. Law 11. 7. The 14. 8. While Jehovah's ban on eating pork was not necessarily based on health considerations, there were and still are hazards connected with the use of this meat for food. Since pigs are indiscriminate in their feeding habits, even eating carrion and offal, they tend to be infested with various parasitic organisms, including those responsible for diseases such as trichinosis and oscarosis. The Israelites generally seem to have viewed swine as especially loathsome. Hence the ultimate degree in disgusting worship is conveyed by the words, the one offering up a gift. The blood of a pig. Issa 66. 3. To the Israelites, few things could have been more inappropriate than a pig with a gold nose ring in its snout. And it is to this that Proverbs 11. 22 compares an outwardly beautiful woman who is not sensible. Although apostate Israelites ate pork. Issa 65. 4. 66. 17. The apocryphal books of 1 Maccabees 1. 65, Dia and 2 Maccabees 6. 18, 19. 7. 1, 2, Dia show that during the foreign domination of Palestine by the Syrian king Antiochus IV Epiphanes and his vicious campaign to stamp out the worship of Jehovah, there were many Jews who refused to eat the flesh of swine, preferring to die for violating the decree of the king rather than to violate the law of God. Whereas some other nations did not eat pork, to the Greeks it was a delicacy. Hence, likely as a result of Hellenistic influence, by the time of Jesus Christ's earthly ministry, there were apparently quite a number of pigs in Palestine, particularly in the Decapolis region. In the country of the Gadarenes there was at least one herd of about 2,000 pigs. When Jesus permitted the demons that he had expelled to enter this large herd, every last one of the animals rushed over a precipice and drowned in the sea. Mount 8. 28-32. Mr. 5. 11-13. They cast out demons who entered swine. No fault can be found with Jesus for allowing the demons to enter the swine, especially since certain unstated factors may very well have been involved, such as whether the owners of the swine were Jews, thus being guilty of disrespect for the law. It was, of course, not required that Jesus exercise foreknowledge as to what the demons would do once they entered the unclean animals. And the demons may have wanted to take possession of the swine in order to derive therefrom some unnatural sadistic pleasure. Also, it might reasonably be argued that a man is worth more than a herd of swine. Mount 12. Furthermore, all animals actually belong to Jehovah by reason of his creatorship, and thus Jesus as God's representative had every right to permit the demons to take possession of the herd of swine. PS 50. 10. Joe 7. 29 The demons entering the swine manifested their ouster from the men in a very forceful way, thus also making very apparent to observers the harm that came to creatures of flesh that became demon-possessed. It demonstrated for such human observers both Jesus' power over the demons and demonic power over fleshly creatures. All of this may have suited Jesus' purpose and may explain why he allowed the unclean spirits to enter the swine. Illustrative use. The inability of swine to recognize the value of pearls was employed by Jesus in illustrating the unwisdom of sharing spiritual things with those having no appreciation whatever of spiritual thoughts and teachings. Mount 7. 6 And in Jesus' illustration of the prodigal son, the degradation to which a young man had sunk was accentuated by his having to hire himself out as a swineherd, a most despicable occupation for a Jew, and by his willingness even to eat the food of these animals. Luke 15. 16. The Apostle Peter compared Christians au texte et acute miritre longo, circa 1050 along roadsides for that reason. The short, stout trunk soon branches out with its lower limbs close to the ground, and this made it a convenient tree along the roadside for a small man like Zacchaeus to climb in order to get a view of Jesus. Luke 19. 2-4. The figs grow in abundant clusters, and are smaller than those of the common fig tree, and are inferior to them. It is the present practice of Egyptian and Cypriot growers of the sycamore fig mulberry trees to pierce the premature fruit with a nail or other sharp instrument in order to make the fruit edible. The wounding, or piercing, of sycamore figs at an early ripening stage induces a sharp increase in the emanation of ethylene gas, which accelerates the growth and ripening of the fruit considerably 3 to 8 times. This is important since otherwise the fruit will not fully develop and will stay hard, or it will be spoiled by parasitic wasps that penetrate the fruit and inhabit it for reproduction. This sheds some light on the occupation of the prophet Amos, who describes himself as a herdsman and a nipper of figs of sycamore trees. M7. 14. In addition to growing in the Jordan Valley, Lu 19. 1, 4 and around Tekoa M1. 1. 7. 14. The sycamore trees were especially abundant in the lowlands of the Shephelah 1 Chi 10. 27. 2 Ch1. 15. 9. 27. And though their fruit was not of the quality of the common fig tree, King David considered it of sufficient value to place the Shephelah groves under the care of an administrative chief. 1 Ch 27. 28 The sycamore fig mulberry trees were evidently abundant in Egypt at the time of the 10 plagues, and they continue to provide a source of food there today. PS 78. 47 The wood is somewhat soft and porous, and quite inferior to that of the cedar, but it was very durable and much used in building. ISA 9. 10 mummy cases made of sycamore wood have been found in Egyptian tombs, and are still in good condition after some 3,000 years. Sychar Sichar, a city of Samaria and the site of Jacob's fountain. It was near the field that Jacob gave to Joseph his son in the vicinity of Shechem. Job 4. 5, 6. Compare Job 24. 32. The Syriac Sinaitic Codex has Sychem instead of Sychar. However, the best Greek manuscripts support the reading Sychar. Certain early non-biblical writers distinguish between Shechem and Sychar. Others do not. Recent excavations have led some to identify Sychar tentatively with the village of Asker, 0.7 kilometers 0.4 mi of Jacob's fountain, and about 1 kilometer 0.6 mi of Shechem. Cincy Middle.ene. A city apparently situated at the southern extremity of ancient Egypt. As 29. 10. 30. 6. The city served as a market or trading post. It is identified with Aswan, situated on the e-bank of the Nile near the island Elephantine and about 690 kilometers 430 miles of Cairo. Si means I me middle dot on from a heb. Root meaning here. Listen. 1. An ancestor of Jesus' mother Mary. Luke 3:30. 2. The form of the name of Simon Peter used once by James at the Jerusalem Council. Acts 15:14. 3. One of the prophets and teachers of the congregation in Antioch, Syria, who laid their hands on Barnabas and Paul after the Holy Spirit had designated these two for missionary work. Simeon's Latin surname was Niger. Act 13:1-3. Synagogue. In the Greek Septuagint the two words ek kol sia, meaning assembly or congregation, and si go ge are bringing together are used interchangeably. The word synagogue eventually took on the meaning of the place or building where the assembly was held. However, it did not completely lose its original meaning, for the Great Synagogue was not a large building but an assembly of noted scholars, credited with settling the Hebrew scripture canon for the Palestinian Jews. It is said to have had its beginning in the days of Ezra or of Nehemiah and to have continued until the time of the Great Sanhedrin. About the 3rd century BCE. James uses the O textuale acute miritra longo. Synagogue 1051 originally had 2 stories. Dates given by scholars for this synagogue vary from the late 2nd century CE to the early 5th century CE. The structure itself was built on the site of an earlier synagogue dating back to the 1st century CE. The earlier synagogue, which was partially excavated recently, was 24.2 meters, 79.4 feet long, and 18.5 meters, 60.7 feet wide. One feature of ancient synagogues was a repository for scripture rolls. Evidently the oldest custom was to keep the scrolls either outside the main building or in a separate room, for safety's sake. Eventually they came to be kept in a portable ark, or chest, that was put in position during worship. In later synagogues, the ark became an architectural feature of the building itself, being built into or onto one of the walls. Adjacent to the ark and facing the congregation was seating for the presiding officers of the synagogue and any distinguished guests. Mount 23. 6th The reading of the law was done from an elevated platform, traditionally located in the center of the synagogue. Around the 3 sides was seating space or benches for the audience, possibly including a separate section for women. It seems that the orientation of the building was considered important, an effort being made to have the worshippers face Jerusalem. Compared R6. 10. Program of worship. The synagogue served as a place for instruction, not sacrifice. Sacrifices were made only at the temple. Synagogue exercises appear to have consisted of praise, prayer, recital and reading of the scriptures, as well as exposition and exhortation or preaching. The giving of praise featured the Psalms. Prayers, while taken from the scriptures to an extent, in time came to be long and ritualistic and were often recited for pretext or show. Mr. 12. 40. Lu 20. 47. One element of synagogue worship was the reciting of the Shema, or what amounted to the Jewish confession of faith. It received its name from the first word of the first scripture used, "Listen Shema, O Israel. Jehovah our God is one Jehovah." The 6. For the most important part of the service was the reading of the Torah or Pentateuch, which took place on Mondays, Thursdays, and each Sabbath. In many synagogues, the law was scheduled to be read entirely in the course of 1 year. In others the program took 3 years. It was because of the emphasis on the reading of the Torah that the disciple James could well observe to the members of the governing body at Jerusalem. From ancient times Moses has had in city after city those who preach him, because he is read aloud in the synagogues on every Sabbath. Act 15. 21. The Mishnah Megillah 4. 1-2 also refers to the practice of reading excerpts of the prophets, known as the Haftarahs, each with its exposition. When Jesus entered the synagogue of his hometown Nazareth, he was handed one of the scrolls that contained the Haftarahs to be read, after which he made an exposition upon it, as was the custom. 4. 17-21. After the reading of the Torah and the Haftarahs, together with their exposition, came preaching or exhortation. We read that Jesus taught and preached in the synagogues throughout the whole of Galilee. Likewise Luke records that it was after the public reading of the law and of the prophets that Paul and Barnabas were invited to speak, to preach. Mount 4. 23. Act 13. 15, 16. Paul's preaching. Following Pentecost of 33 CE and the establishment of the Christian congregation, the apostles, particularly Paul, did much preaching in the synagogues. When entering a city, Paul usually went first to the synagogue and preached there, giving the Jews the first opportunity of hearing the good news of the kingdom, afterward going to the Gentiles. In some cases he spent considerable time, preaching for several Sabbaths, in the synagogue. In Ephesus he taught in the synagogue for 3 months, and after opposition arose, he withdrew the disciples who textui acute miritra longo, Syndic 1052 similar to synagogue procedure. 1 Co 14. 31-35. 1 T2. 11, 12. Synagogues had presiding officers and overseers, as did the early Christian congregations. Mr. 5. 22. Lu 13. 14. Act 20. 28. Row 12. 8 synagogues had attendants or assistants, and so did the Christians in their form of worship. There was one called the sent one or messenger of the synagogue. While finding no counterpart in the historical record of the early Christian congregation, a similar designation, angel, appears in the messages that Jesus Christ sent to the 7 congregations in Asia Minor. Lu 4. 20. 1 T3. 8-10. Re 2. 1, 8, 12, 18. 3. 1, 7, 14. Among other respects in which the synagogue served as a precursor of the Christian assemblies are the following. The local synagogues recognized the authority of the Sanhedrin at Jerusalem, even as Christian congregations recognized the authority of the governing body at Jerusalem, as Acts chapter 15 so clearly shows. In neither were collections taken, and yet in both provision was made for contributions for the assembly and its ministers and for the poor. 2 Co 9. 1-5. Both also served as courts. The synagogue was the place where minor cases involving Jews were heard and disposed of. And so also the Apostle Paul argues that Christians should let the mature ones in the congregation judge matters involving Christians rather than go to worldly courts to settle such differences. 1 Co 6. 1-3 While the synagogue arrangement made provision for the administering of stripes, in the Christian congregation such punishment was limited to rebukes. Similar to the arrangement for Jews in the synagogue, in the Christian congregation the severest measure that could be taken against the one professing to be a Christian was that of expelling him, disfellowshipping or excommunicating him, from the Christian congregation. 1 Co 5. 1-8, 11-13. See Congregation. Expelling. Jesus foretold that his followers would be scourged in the synagogues. Mount 10. 17. 23. 34. Mr. 13. 9 and that they would be put out, expelled. Joe 16. 2 Some of the rulers among the Jews believed in Jesus, but for fear of being expelled from the Jewish congregation, they would not confess him. Joe 12. 42 For giving testimony in behalf of Jesus, a man Jesus had healed from congenital blindness was thrown out by the Jews. Joe 9. 1, 34. Syntax Sintimiddle.a with fortune success. A Christian woman at Philippi whom Paul commended for her integrity and whom he exhorted to be of the same mind in the Lord with a Christian sister named Euodia. php 4. 2, 3 The apostle gave this counsel apparently because of some disagreement between these two, a conclusion supported by several modern translations. Ab, J.B., N.E., F, Def. Syracuse Syramiddle.Qs. A city with a fine harbour, on this coast of the island of Sicily, today called Syracuse or Italian. According to Thucydides, a Greek colony was established at Syracuse in the 8th century BCE. The Apostle Paul stayed at Syracuse for 3 days toward the close of his trip to Rome. In about 59 CE the layover there may have been necessary, because the ship had to wait for suitable sailing wind. Act 28. 12 From Syracuse, Paul's ship went around and came to Rhegium, on the southern tip of Italy. The exact meaning of this expression is not known. Possibly the vessel took a somewhat curved route, away from the coast, in order to get sufficient wind to fill its sails. Or, Maybe it made a circuit, following the coast, to reach Regium. Act 28. 13. Ab. Syria. That region bounded on the E by Mesopotamia, on the W by the Lebanon Mountains, on the N by the Taurus Mountains, on the S by Palestine and the Arabian Desert. The region is called Aram in the Hebrew Scriptures. These boundaries are only general, since Syrian influence and domination within this area were rather fluent and unstable most of the time. In patriarchal times. Of patriarchal times O textuale acute miritra longo, Syrophoenician 1053 kingdom, hostilities between the two prevailed. Israel's first king, Saul, went to war with the Syrian kings of Zobah. 1-14. 47 David, upon becoming king, inflicted heavy losses on the army of Syrian king Hadadezer. At the same time much gold, silver, and copper were taken and sanctified to Jehovah. David also set up garrisons in Damascus and compelled the Syrians to pay tribute. 2-8. 3-12. 1-18. 3-8 Later, more than 30,000 Syrian mercenaries who were hired by the Ammonites, instead of fighting, took flight before the Israelites. After Syrian reinforcements were brought up, however, a battle with Israel ensued and the Syrians suffered great losses, causing them to sue for peace. 2-10. 6-19. 1-19. 6-19. Following this, a certain Syrian rebel named Rezin, who had fled from Hadadezer, made himself king at Damascus and became a resistor of Israel all the days of Solomon. 1-11. 23-25 With these developments Damascus became the most prominent Syrian city and was long recognized as the head of Syria, toward which Jehovah's pronouncements against that nation were directed. Issa 7. 8. 17. 1-3. Am 1. 5. After division of Israel's kingdom. Bible history of the Syrians following the death of Solomon and the dividing of his kingdom tells, in the main, of their successes and reverses in their relations with the Israelites of both the northern and the southern kingdoms. Particular events are mentioned as occurring during the reigns of Asa 1-15. 18-20. 2-16. 2-4, 7, Ahab 1-20. 1-34. 22. 3, 4, 29-35. 2-18. 10, 28-34, Jehoram of Israel 2-6. 24. 7. 16. 8. 28, 29. 9. 14b, 15. 2-22. 5, 6, Jehosh of Judah 2-12. 17, 18. 2-24. 23, 24, Jehoahaz 2-13. 3-7, 22, Jehosh of Israel 2-13. 14-19, 24, 25, Jotam 2-15. 37, 38, Ahaz 2-16. 5-9. 2-28. 5. Issa 7. 1-8. 9. 12, and Joachim 2-24. 2. It was most unusual, worthy of special mention, when there were 3 years without war between Syria and Israel. 1-22. 1. Jehovah's prophet Elisha had certain contacts with the Syrians. For example, he cured the Syrian army chief Naaman of leprosy 2-5. 1-20, and he disclosed to Hazael that he would be king of Syria in place of his master Ben-Hadad 2-8. 7-15 On another occasion, when a detachment of Syrians surrounded Dothan to take Elisha captive, the prophet first asked God to strike them with a form of blindness, and then he led them to Samaria, where their vision was restored. Then he had them fed and sent home. 2-6. 8-23 For further details on these experiences of the Syrians with the prophet, see the article Elisha. The Syrians were Semites, closely related to and associated with the Israelites. Yet in the 8th century BCE there was sufficient difference between their languages that the common Jew did not understand Aramaic, 2 Chi 18. 26-28. Issa 36. 11, 12. See Aramaic the language. Also religiously, there were vast differences between the polytheistic Syrians and the Jews, and it was only when the latter apostatized that worship of the Syrian gods was allowed in the land of Israel. JG 10. 6. 2 Chi 16. 10-16. 2 Ch 28. 22, 23. In the 1st century CE, Syria of apostolic times meant the Roman province that Pompey annexed to the empire in 64 BCE. This province embraced much of the old territory of Syria. The governor of Syria also had supervision of the whole of Palestine. At the time of Jesus' birth, Syria was ruled over by Governor Quirinius, the legate of Emperor Augustus, whose residence was in the capital of the province and third largest city of the Roman Empire, Antioch, on the Orontes River. Lu 2. 1. 2 Jesus restricted his ministry to Palestine proper, but reports of his wonderful miracles reached out into all Syria. Mount 4. 24. When the Christians in Jerusalem were scattered because of the persecution following the stoning of Stephen, some of them carried the good news to Syria's capital, Antioch. First o textoi acute miritra longo, Certus 1054 Canaanite. Translated Phoenician in NW, for the early inhabitants of Phoenicia descended from Canaan, and in time, Canaan came to refer primarily to Phoenicia. Mount 15. 22. FTN her being termed Grecian likely means that she was of Greek descent. Mr. 7. 26. Not long after Passover of 32 CE, this Syrophoenician woman approached Jesus Christ, repeatedly requesting that he expel a demon from her daughter. At first Jesus declined, saying, "It is not right to take the bread of the children and throw it to little dogs." To the Jews, dogs were unclean animals. But, in likening the non-Jews to little dogs, which might be kept in a home, and not to wild dogs of the street, Jesus softened the comparison. Nevertheless, what Jesus said apparently served to test the woman. Humbly, she acknowledged, "Yes, Lord. But really the little dogs do eat of the crumbs falling from the table of their masters." Her words reflected great faith, and therefore, her daughter was healed. Mount 15. 21-28. Mr. 7. 24-30. Certus Citus from a root meaning drag. The Greek name of two gulfs located within the large indentation on the coast of northern Africa. The western gulf between Tunis and Tripoli was called a Certus Minor, now the Gulf of Gabes. Just to the east was Certus Major, the modern Gulf of Sidra. Ancient sailors dreaded both gulfs because of their treacherous sandbanks, which were constantly being shifted by the tides. Regarding vessels that became involved in the shoals, Strabo, a geographer of the 1st century CE, reported, "The safe escape of a boat is rare." Geography, 17, 3, 20. When the Apostle Paul was being taken to Rome as a prisoner, the ship on which he travelled was seized east of Crete by a northeasterly gale. The crew, therefore, feared that the ship would be run aground on the Syrtis, evidently the quicksands or sandbanks of the Gulf of Sidra. Act 27. 14-17. Systems of things. The phrase system of things expresses the sense of the Greek term I middle dot on in more than 30 of its occurrences in the Christian Greek scriptures. On the meaning of I middle dot on, R.C. Trench states, like chaosmos, world at I middle dot on has a primary and physical, and then, superinduced on this, a secondary and ethical, sense. In its primary sense, it signifies time, short or long, in its unbroken duration. But essentially time is the condition under which all created things exist, and the measure of their existence. Thus signifying time, it comes presently to signify all which exists in the world under conditions of time. And then, more ethically, the course and current of this world's affairs. In support of this latter sense, he quotes German scholar C.L.W. Grimm as giving the definition: the totality of that which manifests itself outwardly in the course of time. Synonyms of the New Testament, London, 1961, pages 202, 203. The basic sense of I-on, therefore, is age, or period of existence, and in scripture it often denotes a long space of time. Act 3. 21. 15. 18, including an endless period of time, that is, forever, eternity. Mr. 3. 29. 11. 14. Heb 13. 8 for these senses, see age. Here, however, we consider the sense of the term dealt with in the latter part of the definition quoted in the preceding paragraph. As an aid in understanding this sense, we may recall certain uses of the terms age, era, and epoch in English. We may speak of an age, era, or epoch in the sense of a period of time in history characterized by distinctive development or course of events, or distinguished by some prominent figure or typical feature or features. We may speak of the age of exploration, referring to the time of Columbus, Magellan, Cook, and other maritime explorers, or to the feudal age, the Dark Ages, the Victorian era, or, more recently, the Space Age. In each case what is prominent is not so much the time period itself but the distinguishing or characteristic texto e acute longo systems of things 1055 will of our God and Father. Many translations here render I-on as age, but it is evident that Christ's ransom sacrifice did not serve to deliver Christians from an age or space of time, for they continued living in the same age as the rest of mankind. However, they were delivered from the state or system of things existing during that time period and characterizing it. Compare to 2. 11-14. The Apostle wrote to the Christians at Rome. Quit being fashioned after this system of things, but be transformed by making your mind over. Row 12. 2. It was not the time period itself that set the fashion, pattern, or model for people of that time, but it was the standards, practices, manners, customs, ways, outlook, styles, and other features characterizing that time period. At Ephesians 2. 1, 2 the Apostle speaks of those to whom he writes as having been dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you at one time walked according to the system of things following the way, j.b. following the course, rs of this world. In commenting on this text, the Expositor's Greek Testament Volume 3, p. 283 shows that time is not the sole or prime factor here expressed by I-on. In support of the rendering of I-on by course, it says, that word conveys the three ideas of tenor, development, and limited continuance. This course of the world which is evil is itself evil, and to live in accordance with it is to live in trespasses and sins. Edited by W. Nicole, 1967. Ages, states, systems of things. There are various systems of things, or prevailing states of affairs, that have existed or will exist. Those brought about by God through his Son are, obviously, righteous systems of things. For example, by means of the law covenant God introduced what some might call the Israelite or Jewish epoch. However, here again what distinguished this period of history as regards God's relations with mankind was the state of affairs and the characteristic features brought about by the law covenant. Those features included a priesthood, a system of sacrifices and dietary regulations as well as of tabernacle and temple worship with festivals and Sabbaths, all of which formed prophetic types and shadows. And also a national system that came to involve a human king. However, when God foretold a new covenant J 31-34, the old covenant became in a sense obsolete, even though God permitted it to continue in operation for a period of centuries thereafter. Heb 8. 13 Then, in 33 CE God brought the law covenant to its end by his nailing it, in effect, to his Son's torture stake. Col 2. 13-17. Evidently for this reason, Hebrews 9:26 says of Christ that he manifested himself once for all time at a conclusion of the systems of things to put sin away through the sacrifice of himself. Nevertheless, the distinguishing features of that age or epoch did not come to their complete end until 70 CE, when Jerusalem and its temple were destroyed and the Jewish people were scattered. This disaster, although the last Judean stronghold at Masada fell to the Romans 3 years later, or in 73 CE permanently ended the Jewish priesthood, sacrifices, and temple worship as prescribed in the law. It also ended the Jewish national arrangement as established by God. This is undoubtedly why the Apostle, many years after Christ's death, but prior to the Roman devastation of Jerusalem, could relate certain past Israelite history and say, "Now these things went on befalling them as examples, and they were written for a warning to us upon whom the ends of the systems of things have arrived." 1 Co 10. 11. Compare Mount 24. 3. 1 Pe 4. 7. By means of his ransom sacrifice and the new covenant that it validated, Jesus Christ was used by God to bring in a different system of things, one primarily involving the congregation of anointed Christians. Hajj 8. 7-13. This marked the opening of a new epoch, characterized au texto e acute mirita longo, Systems of Things 1056. The Law Covenant. It continued contemporaneously with the I-on of that covenant, and it endured beyond the end of the I-on, or state of affairs, that the Law Covenant had introduced. The worldly I-on evidently began sometime after the flood, when an unrighteous way of life developed, one characterized by sin and rebellion against God and his will. Hence, Paul could also speak of the God of this system of things as blinding the minds of unbelievers, an evident reference to Satan the devil. 2 Co 4. 4. Compare Job 12. 31. Primarily, Satan's dominion and influence have molded the worldly I-on and given it its distinctive features and spirit. Compare F2. 1, 2. Commenting on Romans 12. 2. The Expositor's Greek Testament Volume 2, p. 688 says, "Even apparent or superficial conformity to a system controlled by such a spirit, much more an actual accommodation to its ways, would be fatal to the Christian life." Such worldly I-on was to continue long after the Apostles' day. For example, at Matthew 13. 37-43, in explaining a parable, Jesus said that the field is the world chaosmos. The harvest is a conclusion of a system of things form of I-on. Therefore, just as the weeds are collected and burned with fire, so it will be in the conclusion of the system of things. Some translations, such as the King James Version, use world to translate both chaosmos and I-on in these verses. It is clear, however, that the farmer in the illustration does not burn up the field, representing the world, but only the weeds. Hence, what comes to an end, or concludes, is not the world chaosmos but the system of things I-on. George Campbell's translation renders these portions. The field is the world. The harvest is the conclusion of this state. So shall it be at the conclusion of this state. The Four Gospels, London, 1834. Jesus showed that the wheat represented true anointed Christians, genuine disciples, whereas the weeds represented imitation Christians. Thus, the conclusion of the system of things, here depicted as the harvest time, would not refer to the conclusion of the Jewish system of things, in this case, nor to the conclusion of the state in which wheat and weeds grew together undisturbed, but must refer to the end of the same system of things as later referred to by the Apostle, that is, the present system of things marked by satanic domination. 1 T6. 17. So, too, with the additional illustration given by Jesus regarding the dragnet and the separation of the fish, depicting how it will be in the conclusion of the system of things. The angels will go out and separate the wicked from among the righteous. Mount 13. 47-50. These expressions by Jesus were doubtless in the disciples' minds when sometime later they asked the question as to the sign of his presence and of the conclusion of the system of things. Mount 24. 3. Jesus promised to be with his disciples in their disciplining work right down to the conclusion of the system of things also must refer to the conclusion of the state of affairs resulting from domination by Satan. Mount 28. 19, 20. Other examples of texts where I-on refers to such wicked system of things include Luke 16. 8. 1 Corinthians 1. 20. 2. 6, 8. 3. 18. Ephesians 1. 21. The coming system of things. At Matthew 12. 32 Jesus is quoted as saying that anyone speaking against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven in this system of things nor in that to come. This might be read as a reference to the Jewish system of things and the then future system of things that Christ would bring in by means of the new covenant. However, the evidence indicates that he referred instead to the present wicked system of things and to a system of things that would be introduced at the conclusion of that wicked system of things. He referred to that same future state in promising that those living home and family o textoi acute miritra longo, Tobith 1057 he made the systems of things. The particular meaning of the Greek word I middle dot on in these two verses has been variously understood. One way to understand them is to view the Greek term as referring to the distinguishing or characteristic features of a time period. In Hebrews chapter 11, the inspired writer is discussing how, by faith, the men of old times had witness borne to them. Verses 2 then, in his succeeding words, he presents examples of faithful men in the pre-flood era, in the patriarchal epoch, and in the period of Israel's covenant relationship with God. During all these distinct periods, and by means of the developments caused, formed, and accomplished in them, God was working out his purpose to eliminate rebellion and provide the way for reconciliation with himself on the part of deserving humans by means of successive systems of things. So those men of old had to have, and did have, faith that the invisible God was indeed directing matters in an orderly manner. They believed that he was the unseen producer of the various systems of things and that the goal they sought, the fulfillment of the promise, was an absolute certainty in God's due time. In faith, they looked forward to the further outworking of God's purpose, which included the system of things produced by the new covenant based on Jesus' sacrifice. Heb 11. 39, 40. 12. 1, 18-28. Another way to understand the use of I middle dot on in Hebrews 1, 2 and 11. 3 is that it is an equivalent of the Greek term chaosmos in the sense of the world or universe, the totality of created things including the sun, moon, stars, and the earth itself. This view is evidently supported by the statement in Hebrews 11. 3 that what is beheld has come to be out of things that do not appear. This verse could also be taken as a reference to the Genesis creation account, which could logically precede Paul's references to Abel verses 4, Enoch vs 5, 6, and Noah verses 7. Thus, Paul may have been expanding upon his definition of faith by referring to the existence of the universe consisting of sun, moon, and stars as clear evidence that there is a creator. Compare 1. 20. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the Hebrew term chalid is similar in meaning to I-om, referring in some texts to life's duration. Job 11. 17. PS 39. 5. 89. 47, but in other cases the features of the time period appear to be the main thing signified, allowing for rendering its system of things. PS 17. 13, 14. 49. 1. Some translations use the word world to render this term in these latter texts, but this rendering more or less bypasses the sense implied, namely, that of continuing time. Tarnak Tara middle dot Nak. An enclave city of Manasseh in the territory of Issachar. Jos 17. 11. 1 ch 7. 29 that was assigned to the Kohathite Levites. Jos 21. 20, 25 under the command of Joshua, the Israelites defeated the king of Taanach. Jos 12. 7, 21 but the Manassites failed to drive out the Canaanites from this and other cities. Eventually, however, these Canaanites were put to forced labor. JG 1. 27, 28 in the time of Judge Barak the forces of Jabin the king of Hazor, led by his army chief Sisera, were defeated at Taanach. JG 5. 19 during Solomon's reign the city was in the district assigned to Baana, one of the 12 deputies in charge of supplying food for the royal table. 1 Kai 4. 7. 12 archaeological evidence from Taanach and the relief on a temple wall at Karnak indicate that the city was taken by Pharaoh Shishak when he invaded Palestine in the 5th year of the reign of Solomon's son and successor Hobom. 2 ch 12. 2-4. Taanach is identified with Tel Taranach, about 8 km 5 miles of Megiddo and on the south edge of the plain of Jezreel in Israel. The site occupied an important position on at least 2 trade routes, one leading to the plain of Akko and the other to the plain of Sharon. Tarnath's Halotara middle. Nath Shiloh. A site on Ephraim's border. O textually acute Miritra longo, to Bil 1058 Ras Abbot, about 5 km 3 mi of the Jordan River and 10 km